I'm not used to talking sitting down, so we'll see. If I have to sit down, I'll sit down. I realize that this is a cold, dreary day, and you've just had a supper high in carbs, and this is a dim room, and you've had a long day, and if you need to nod off, that's okay. I will not be offended, I promise you. You never know what's going to happen. I was gathering my things up in Goldsboro to leave the house, and the doorbell rang. And I thought to myself, what fresh hell is this? And I went to the door, and it turns out that it was one of my members who takes great pride in never coming to church when there might be a sermon. He only comes for cantatas and such. Now, I don't take personal offense at that. That's been true for a long time, long before I got there. But he had in his hand a bottle of Glenfiddich Reserve 15-year aged single malt whiskey. I said, "Come in." And he said, "I thought you might be needing this." I said, "Well, it would be good, and I'd love to have a little dram with you, but I'm actually on the way out the door to go to Tarboro." "What are you doing in Tarboro?" he said. I'm sharing at a Lenten supper at Howard Memorial Presbyterian Church." And you know what he said? "In that case, you better make it a double." Well, he left. I looked at the bottle. I thought, oh, that would be pretty good. But I opted for Smooth Move tea instead. And here I am. Now, I'm thinking that bottle is still there when I get home. I'm really, really happy to be here. Faye Price is a force of nature. You know that. And from the very beginning, her enthusiasm, her energy, her efficiency, her ardor, and her order roped me in. And I was happy to say yes. And I love it when people in my congregation take hold of a task with that kind of enthusiasm. So when I found out I was going to have hip replacement, I just didn't have the heart to tell her that I was not, in fact, going to come. So I'm here. My wife thinks I'm crazy, but here I am. So thank you. I want to say a word about Ben. It's just an honor to be back in this church where he is serving so ably, and in front of the pulpit where he presides so greatly. What a handsome preacher you have. He is kind of easy on the eyes, isn't he? Oh, boy. Now, I've been holed up this week, so I've had a chance to look at some things. I thought, well, I'll look at Howard Memorial's website, and I found the worship, and I discovered that you are, in fact, have been since the first of the year, working your way through the Gospel of Matthew. If that's news to you, then you need to come back to church. So I thought, good, I'll watch one of these sermons. And there he was in that robe, with the stoles. I thought, man, he would be great to listen to every week. But he's not just a good-looking preacher. He's a brilliant preacher. And I have thought often about where you choose to sit in church and what you choose to wear and the gifts of God that come to a community of faith in people like you. Now, that was what the sermon was about. And what a great privilege to be here in his church. The truth is, my wife Sally took Ben's robe. Now, in her defense, I have a robe that's almost like it. I got that robe in Scotland in 1996. But she saw it and she put it in the car. We drove all the way to Topsail Beach, and when we got out, I said, "That's not my robe." She said, "Yes, it is your robe. That's your robe." "No, it's not my robe." It was Ben's robe. And I got to bring it back. Now, I think I brought it back that next week, and I put it in the trunk of my Honda Goldwing and rode it back to Tarboro. It was a nice journey. I don't look nearly as good in my robe as Ben does in his. I came right up 111, out of Goldsboro. 111, 222. And out of Wayne County, I came into Greene County, Watery Branch. I was a stone's throw away from my great-great-great-grandmother Lavinia's grave, Watery Branch. The record in the Wayne County Courthouse says she died of a cerebral hemorrhoid. Now you just ponder that a minute. I chuckle too every time I ride by. Up through Stantonsburg and Saratoga, and then near the sacred ground of Macclesfield. Macclesfield, the sign outside says Bird Sanctuary. I think they should put one underneath that says Home of the Saints, Sacred Ground. That's my people in Macclesfield. Whatever's good about me, and there's not much, comes from those people and in that place. They are all gone, but they are well-kent faces and deeply remembered. I love to ride by. It's just great. I feel at home in this part of the world. Well, I was realizing when I crossed over and headed towards Tarboro that I was not far from the bridge over Town Creek on State Road 1109, where I once peed my pants as a boy. My uncle had taken us in a VW Beetle, which was quite a novelty in those days, out of Macclesfield and to Rocky Mount. And we had gone to watch Godzilla. I don't remember whether it was Godzilla versus Mothra or Godzilla versus King Kong. I don't remember. But we got back in the Beetle, and he headed down a back road. It was really dark. And in those days, a VW Beetle's lights were just little needles. And then he slowed down on this dark country road. He wore a look of feigned panic on his face. "I don't know what's wrong," he said. "The car's slowing down." And then he reached over, and we couldn't see, and flipped off the ignition and turned off the lights. And we rolled to a stop over the bridge over Town Creek. "What's the matter? What's the matter? What's the matter, Uncle Raymond?" "I don't know. I don't know. What are we going to do?" I don't know." And then he said, "Oh, goodness, don't look over there, but I think that's Godzilla's head sticking out of the..." So I peed my pants. And we screamed, and he started up the car like magic, and we rode maybe 100 yards down the road, and we said, "Do it again, do it again." Well, Tarboro for me is Evelyn and Rad Bailey. It's my aunt and uncle. Some of you don't even know who they are or were. Their place knows them no more. But they reigned as king and queen on Hilma Circle. Rad with his pipe and his pen, and Evelyn with those braces, that beatific look on her face, particularly whenever Carolina won and there was a Democrat in the White House. I loved them. And the thing is, they loved this town, and they loved this church, and they loved each other. Sally and I often say to each other, rare are the people who are married, who love their whole life. There are a lot of people who end up playing double solitaire, aren't there? But Evelyn and Rad Bailey loved each other. You didn't know where one stopped and when the other one started. So I rode by Hilma Circle today. It was great. I think one of the saddest days of my life I spent at 909 North Main Street. If you don't know what that is, that's the Edgecombe County Library. Some reason my parents thought it was a good idea for me as a very little boy to have a weekend away at my grandparents' house in Macclesfield. It was great the first day, running around that tree that Hazel almost tore down and left as a kind of climbing miracle. Digging potatoes in the back garden as though it were fun. Everybody, it looked like it was fun. I was digging potatoes away, running around in that backyard that was really just dirt, swept dirt. And it was swept about every day. It was wonderful. But when I went to bed that night, I had a pit in my stomach. I didn't know what that was. It was a pit. I went to sleep, and when I woke up, I saw on the mantel a picture of my mother. It's one of those 1940s kind of pictures, with the curly hair and the big red lipstick and the glamour pose. And then that ache in my chest started spreading out, and it went all the way up, and it started leaking out my eyes. Now, I didn't know what homesickness was. I went into the kitchen. My grandma said, "You're mighty quiet. Something the matter?" No. We choose to hide our pain, don't we? Well, we eat through the day, and I thought I was doing pretty good. And about dark, that chimes on the Macclesfield Presbyterian Church started whining. Wow, 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 wow. I thought my heart was going to break. Well, the answer to all that was that the next day, my last day, I should spend at the library in Tarboro with my aunt, who could entertain me with books and puzzles and such. It was the longest day of my entire life. I still remember that smell of floor wax and old musty paper and people's hands on books. It was terrible. And then Rad came, and it was time to go home. We got in that big Chevrolet for the ride all the way to Wilson. But when you're homesick, it might as well be Wyoming. It took forever. And when we got there, the car hadn't stopped good in the driveway when I hopped out, up those back steps through the kitchen, and my mother was ironing clothes. And I grabbed onto her leg as I was only about hip high, and I would not let go. This place is so full of memories. And I'm a survivor. I survived summer mission here. I pulled up, and the next day Bob Burns was gone. I don't think he came back for 6 weeks. I had my first funeral. He dressed me up for it. Bob. I had my cassock and my little this and my frills, and I'd never dressed such. I didn't know anything about doing a funeral. I was so nervous, I went outside there by the gate, and then the preschool children were coming in. And I heard one of them say to the other, "Look, there's Jesus." It's been all downhill from there, I can tell you that. Do you know I misspelled resurrection all the way through my first sermon, and Bob circled every one of them in red, 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 red. He said, "If you're going to be a preacher, you have to learn how to spell resurrection, for heaven's sake." Jane Mara delivered a scathing evaluation to that sermon. I thought it was pretty good, but her acerbic pen said otherwise. When I got to the end of her evaluation, I knew that I had pretty much wasted her time. Now, I took umbrage. I got red-faced, but I went back later and looked at that sermon, and of course it was true. It was completely true. I wasted her time. Anyway, I'm really, really happy to be here. And I'm sorry I'm not at my best. I'm really not. I went back to work yesterday, and Ruth, the receptionist, said to me, "You've gotten old in a week." I said, "Listen, Ruth, they cut my femur in half. They took a crowbar and pried my hip out of its socket. they took a reamer bit and reamed out my hip and screwed a new cup in. And then they took a ball attached to a long spike and drove it into my sawed-into femur. And then they took another crowbar and they pried it all back in place and sewed me up. I said, the reason I look older is I feel older. But I'm here, and I'm glad to be here. I can't hear, so I'm to talk about Matthew, the Beatitude, blessed are the poor in spirit, yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for you will be comforted. I know a whole lot more about the second than I do the first. I got to a point in this book, and there's a section called Missing the Point. Matthew 5:3 is not saying it is holy to be poor. I stopped right there. Well, I don't know, I thought, because I can't hear Jesus say in Matthew, blessed are the poor in spirit, without hearing the echo of the Beatitudes in Luke. You know those, don't you? Blessed are you poor. Ptokos, which is the Greek word for bent over poor. This is not working class poor, we're getting by. This is homeless poor, burdened poor. Blessed are you poor. Well, that's pretty close to holiness, isn't it? To have Jesus call you blessed. I started tracking that down. You know, Luke's gospel is different from Matthew's. Luke's gospel is sometimes called the gospel of the poor. It begins, if you remember, with the angel Gabriel's appearance to a young, poor peasant girl with incredible news. And the news was, you're going to have a baby, and the baby's name is going to be Son of the Most High God. And then you remember what happens? Mary sings a revolutionary song that would make Congresswoman OAC's platform seem tame. The Lord, Mary sings, has overthrown those in power, and he has raised up the humble. He has satisfied the hungry with good things, but the rich he has sent empty away. Then this Jesus ends his life in the public shame and humiliation of the cross. And remember, the soldiers gamble for the sum total of his estate, which is the clothes on his back. That's pretty poor. He's buried as a pauper in a borrowed tomb. In between that beginning and ending, the rich do not fare well. I can't do what I would like to do, which is carry you all the way through the gospel and go chapter by chapter and help you see how much Luke says about the poor. Here's the highlights. Jesus, in his inaugural sermon, takes the scroll of Isaiah and stands up and reads it and then sits down. The sermon defines his mission as preaching good news to the poor. That was it. In Jesus' teaching, a diligent farmer whose craftiness and good fortune have led him to having more and more crops, and who decides to build bigger barns to store those crops, and then to go to a retirement seminar where he can learn to wine, dine, recline, and shine. That man is called a fool. He sends his followers out into the country. Do you remember? And he says, take no provisions. No walking stick, no purse, no pack, no bread, no shoes, no extra clothes. And he instructs them to beg for their food. He warns of the sower's good seed falling among thorns. And he tells what the thorns stand for wealth and the pleasures of this life. He sends away a rich man who wants to follow him, but will not liquidate all of his earthly possessions. He tells his followers when they throw a party, don't invite people who can pay you back. Invite the poor. They can never pay you back. He tells a frightening story of a rich man burning in hell, while the beggar who has laid outside his gate day after day dies and is carried directly to Abraham's side in heaven. If you think about it, even Luke's most beloved story, what we call the prodigal son, features an irresponsible son who squanders the inheritance to the point of being ptokos, poor, abject poor. He's the hero, while the older brother, the responsible one, is left standing outside the party. Don't take my word for it. You work your way through the gospel, and you see if the poor are holy. I think they are in Luke. And of course, Luke's rendering of this text tonight, blessed are the poor in spirit, and some of the other Beatitudes is a real head-scratcher. In Luke, there are but 4 blessings, and they're followed by 4 curses. Here's who Jesus calls blessed: the poor, the hungry, the weeping victims of oppression, and the persecuted. And here's who Jesus says are cursed: the rich, the full, the happy consumer, and the praised. Now you tell me, how do you make sense of that? I don't have a good answer. I really don't. I'll share one offered by a hero of mine, Fred Craddock. This seems like the truth to me. There are no urgings or exhortations to behave in certain ways so as to earn blessings and avoid curses in this text. In fact, there's not a call to action at all. Jesus is just pronouncing the facts. He's painting for us a picture of what the kingdom of God is. He is not making suggestions about how to be happy or giving warnings on how to keep from being miserable. Jesus is making defining statements on the way of life inside and outside the reign of God. It is a reversal of fortunes, the rich and the poor, the powerful and the powerless, the full and the empty. Being cooped up in recuperation this week has given me time to read a fascinating book. The title is Made, M-A-I-D. That's the title. It's subtitled Hard Work, Low Pay, and a Mother's Will to Survive by Stephanie Land. It's an interesting book. The first sentence of the book grabs you. My daughter learned to walk in a homeless shelter. Now think about it. It's a complicated tale, this book, of just how it was that she and her daughter ended up in that shelter. All tales of how people end up in the shelter are always complicated. She remembers an intact life, going with her parents and other church members to the park and handing out sandwiches to the homeless. Jesus loves you, she would say to some as she handed them a sandwich. She remembers one man answering, he just seems to love you a little more, honey. She remembers taking down angels from the angel tree at church for presents for the needy children. She went shopping with her parents. She carefully wrapped the packages, prepared the gifts, and then was deeply disappointed when, on delivery, there was a crack open the door, the taking of the bag, a not very effusive thank you, a begrudging acknowledgement. Later, when her family fell apart and she got pregnant with a child of a bad boyfriend and her life caved in, and as a single mother, she was forced into life on the dole, and she was at one time receiving 7 different kinds of public assistance. She understood the humiliation. The story of how she struggled to free herself from that prison is a compelling story. I encourage you to read it. It's the harrowing tale of what it's like to work low-wage jobs with no benefits, warding off hunger with coffee so that her daughter could eat, driving a beater car and praying it would not break down one more day, having to leave a very sick child at daycare, bad daycare, because she could not afford to miss her job and be fired, facing the down-putting degradation of others who had no sympathy for her lot. Once at the grocery store, she paid for some meager groceries with her EBT food stamp card. The man behind her, loud enough for all around to hear, called out, "You're welcome, honey." It was his way of saying, "I bought your meal." To get by, she took a job as a maid for a cleaning service, cleaning houses for wealthy clients. She supplemented her work by doing landscaping when she could. Stephanie Land was good at cleaning. She was too good, in fact. Her company ordered her to slow down, knowing that their many customers would expect others to clean to match her speed and her efficiency. So she took her time and she began to snoop. This is the best part of the book. She'd stopped organizing the stacks of papers and receipts on the island. She started studying them. She didn't simply put pill bottles back in the drawers in the bathroom. She noted what the prescriptions were, even counted the pills week to week. She noted these truths. The bigger the house, the more the owners were gone to keep it afloat, and the more prescription bottles there would be in their bathroom. She discovered that so many of the houses and lives that looked so grand on the outside had degenerated on the inside into double solitaire and separate bedrooms, estranged lives desperate in their consumption of every new gadget and of pornography and expensive toys. She came to see that the fact that she could not afford to buy her daughter such things was in fact a blessing, not a curse. This is where Jesus' word begins to make sense to me. She says, "We went to the beach and we looked for crabs under the rocks instead. We spent rainy Saturdays doing a 25-cent thrift store puzzle. I vowed never to have a house bigger than I could clean myself." I wonder if this is not something of what Jesus meant. That in the kingdom of God that is coming, and is in fact already here, the conventional wisdom about what makes a person wealthy, about consumption, about things, about happiness, is all going to be set on its head. Maybe what Jesus is doing is calling us to see that the world as we know it and have organized it and have benefited from it is in fact passing away. A new world is coming, and things will be different. Our prized possessions and our pretties and our achievements and our piles of money will be as useless as monopoly currency and real estate deeds when the game is over. I pondered all this as I flew out of the Tampa airport a few weeks ago. I was reading the Gospel of Luke, convicted over and over again. And I got into the TSA line. Methodically, I stripped myself of my possessions. My computer, my phone, my watch, my belt, my shoes, my wallet, my keys, my change, every scrap of paper on my body. I put them into bins and sent them away. When I stepped into the scanner that was the threshold between two different worlds, you see. And I raised my arms up for an x-ray. I might as well have been naked. In fact, one day I realized I will be at a different portal, at a different screening, at a different scanner. Maybe it's the better part of wisdom to get ready for that new world. I'm going to make a decision to finish this beatitude and leave the other undone because I want to be faithful to your time. And I want to close by telling you that this is a personal struggle for me and a story of what I think it means to be a person who has means in a world like this. When we lived in Wisconsin for 14 years, it was a very generous call that took us there. For heaven's sakes, it was Wisconsin. It had to be generous, right? Part of our package, which was very generous, was that the church had purchased a house for us. They purchased the house. It was in a gated community. There were 3 golf courses, which were beautiful when you could ever find them beneath the snow. I think there were 6 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms. I've never lived in a house so grand, so magnificent. It was a kind of golden handcuff, you see. The church said, we purchased this house, and if you stay here 20 years, it's all yours. It's yours. So that was the arrangement. From the beginning, I was terribly uncomfortable. I whined and complained about how awkward it felt living in such a house in a world like this, having all these empty rooms and bedrooms. I was miserable, and I made my wife miserable, whining and complaining about it. As for her, she just hoped that all our children would come, and they would all have a bedroom, and they would all have a bathroom. We didn't really think that maybe they didn't want to come to Wisconsin all the time. While I was whining and complaining, my wife set about doing something about it. Lo and behold, she invited the session of the church over and fed them a meal before the meeting at our house. She fixed the meal, served the meal. She prepared the living room so the meeting would be comfortable. And then the next month, she did it again and again and again. Before I knew it, there were Sunday school classes meeting in our house. There was a marriage enrichment seminar. There was a men's Bible study. My wife single-handedly set about turning our house into a blessing. But here's where it really came. She came home one day, and I knew that she wanted something because she kept looking at me. What? I'd said. She was just trying to determine whether this was the right time. She said, there's a girl in my counseling practice. She's a smart girl. She came from a bad family. She broke out. She got a scholarship to Marquette. She finished her first year. It was going great. And she met a bad boy. And he got her pregnant. And he's a heroin addict. And he's abandoned her. And I said, and? She said, I want them to come here. In our house? Yes, she said. There's a baby? Yes, there's a baby, 6 months old. Her name's Eva. Well, my wife is a force of nature. I knew, so I said yes. They moved in. All I could think was, there goes my Bermuda shorts with the broken zipper that I always wear when I'm in the living room. there goes my life. And, it was a struggle. This girl's understanding of financial planning was to get as many credit cards as she could and spend the max on them and then leave them behind, throw them away as if they had never happened. That was her idea. We worked hard. It was a struggle. But pretty soon it started to feel right. And then she came home and looked at me again. And she said, the Badke's house burned down. I said, I know that. Well, she said, we still have 4 bedrooms. And you want them to come here? Well, why not? She said. So Mark and Donna and their 2 teenage children, teenage son and teenage daughter, moved in. The house was full. I remember one night I was late at a church meeting and I thought, all I want to do is go to my chair and sit down and get a beer and maybe watch a game or something. I just want to be quiet. I came in the house. It was probably 10:30 at night. There was the teenage girl canoodling in my chair with her boyfriend in front of MTV on the television. I just walked right on by, tiptoed, and went to bed. But you know what? It all worked out. It worked out so good that Jessica and Eva graduated and moved out their own home. And we took in 2 more girls, children. I was all wrong, you see. I could just while away feeling guilty without thinking about maybe what I could do with my blessings. I think that's part of what it means to be poor in spirit, isn't it? What the book says, to be open to things, to live in openness as a wealthy person as to how God might call you to bless the world. I think that's enough for tonight. And if any of you want the rest of it, I'll hang around afterward and I'll give you the whole load. But that's where I'm going to stop. I will tell you this, then I'll close. When my mother finally pried me off of her leg, and she had to pry me off her leg, she picked me up in her arms, and she sat back on that ugly sofa we had that was green and black plaid, and that's when the tears just let loose. It was a major storm of retching and weeping. And she, like a good mother, just rocked back and forth. How does a mother know that rhythm, that rocking rhythm? She knew just what to say. And that storm passed on through, except the remnants of it, the... And she held me there. And she held me there. I was reading a psalm 2 days ago. Do you know the psalm? Psalm 130. O God, my heart is not proud, nor are my eyes haughty. I do not think or chase after things too great or marvels that are beyond me. But with peace and tranquility, I have set my heart so that I am like a child at his mother's breast. Can you see that? Well, thank you for having me here. And I'll be glad. I don't know if I'm probably way past time. So, yeah.
And thank you for reminding us what we started with last week, that as much as the Beatitudes, we want the smart people in the room, Bob, to figure them out for us and to tell us what they mean, that they're to be wrestled with and to be lived and constantly. So thank you for coming
thank you
tonight. And he'll stick around if you have some questions for him one-on-one and whatnot. But thank you so much.
Thank you.